Okay, so welcome to your last official week of class. Just a couple of reminders about next week. So for you guys, it's relatively easy. You just show up at the same time on Monday, a week from today. That's when your final is due. Class does not go the full length, so we're on final schedule next week, which is the same for all classes, which means that we go from 8 to 10, not 8 to 11 like normal. And then you could have a final after that at 10:30. There's a half-hour break between finals. I will have you guys come in. You'll turn in your portfolio in the back. Generally, we leave them all out because everybody likes to look at everybody else's portfolio. So we'll put them out in the back. We'll leave them out. I will have a little sheet with an kind of a summary and then a web address. You'll come to one of the computers, and there'll be a survey for you to fill out online. I used to do paper surveys, but I discovered that it's a whole lot easier to do it that way. It also preserves your anonymity, so you can be completely anonymous and honest about what you thought about the class. I will ask you a bunch of questions about what you thought of specific assignments, how I could improve the class, those kinds of things. And that feedback is very valuable. It changes how I teach the class. It changes assignments, etc. So I sincerely appreciate that. I will also bring in a bunch of donuts, so you can have a donut as well. I always bring those in on the last day. And then we will not have any class on Wednesday. So because the way final schedule works, you either get assigned Monday or you get assigned Wednesday. Our class covers 3 hours, which means I can pick whether it's Monday or Wednesday. I always pick the first day, so it's due Monday, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So you don't have to show up. This class is officially over at 10 o'clock next Monday. So if you're doing posts or your comments or any of that kind of stuff, it all has to be done by 10 o'clock. The class closes at that point. Does that make sense? So nothing can be, I want to resubmit an assignment or anything like that. Everything has to be turned in, posted at 10, end of class. Okay? I will do my very best to get your grades done as quickly as possible. I usually get them done either that day or on Wednesday of that week. So you should have them. I submit them at that point, and however long it takes for you guys to get them from there. I think it's 24 hours or something. So it should be really quick at that point. That's my goal, at least, to have it quick. So are there any questions about kind of that as a trajectory of where we are? Okay, good. So today we're going to go through SketchUp and perspectives, which is kind of the last piece of the SketchUp puzzle. We'll deal with collaging again in SketchUp and do some fun stuff. I front-loaded what we're going to do today earlier in the semester. You guys remember back when we were putting people into a scene and we were doing shadows? That's essentially what we're doing today. It's a little bit more involved than that. But you already have the skills to do what we're doing today relatively easily, or at least that's the hope. So we will work on the perspectives today. Don't forget that 3 of the 4 SketchUps, so a section, elevation, plan, a perspective, 3 of those 4 are due as assignment 106 on Wednesday, so next class. Okay? Next class, I'll bring the portfolios out again. We won't have a big formal lecture, but I will talk about binding and printing and those kinds of things. If you want me to sit with you and look over your portfolio and give you comments and critique it, I'd be happy to do that as well. Sometimes the best thing to do is to print at least a couple pages and see how the colors actually turn out and whether they look the way you think that they're going to look or that sort of thing. So we're very much moving toward the end, and it'll all be done next Monday, which is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. So today we're going to work in the world of perspectives in SketchUp. And previously, I've always gone straight into SketchUp and done the elevations or done the plans and gotten those images ready, and then gone online and looked for the image that I was going to use as the backdrop. When I'm doing the perspective, it's actually more important that I go find the image first and then make the SketchUp model match the image. And so I need to be aware of a couple things when I'm starting to set up the perspective. One is, if I'm looking at the shadows, where can I actually, when I'm looking for an original image, how do I want the shadows to look? So in this case, if I look quickly at the SketchUp model here, as I swing the shadows are pretty much, in my model, always coming toward me, which means that when I look for my original image, I need to have the sun coming toward me. Does that make sense? Right? If I have the opposite, it's really not going to work in my particular model. So when I jump over into the Creative Commons search, oops, that's the wrong one, sorry. Oh, I should point out, I'm very, very close to having all the grade sheets done for you guys. I probably need 20 more minutes, and then I'll be done, and you'll have a current grade sheet. I'll give that to you today so you can see where you are on things. So let me do search.creativecommons.org. We're going to look for Yosemite Meadow. And as I said before, I'm looking for a scene where the sun is away from me. So I'm looking at the shadows in these scenes, trying to find one that feels right. So something like this is probably a good one for me to choose because the sun's right there coming toward me. Okay? The bushes in the foreground are a little bit big. It's going to block a fair amount of my building, so I don't know that this is exactly the right image, but I like the sun condition. This one would also be a really good one. Right here, because the sun's right there coming down, and I kind of like this perspective. I think I'm going to pick this one as my background image. Okay, so let me go ahead and download this. I'll look at the original size here, and let me show it, and then I'm going to copy it into today's folder. And let me create a new folder for today. All right, and we'll paste that in there. Perfect. And so now I want to take some time and I want to look at this image and start to analyze it. So let me go ahead and open up Photoshop here. And then I'll go ahead and I'll open up that image that I picked. And let me get to today. All right, so there it is. Okay, and when I look at this, okay, the sun's over here on the left, so the shadow on my building should be over, kind of shining down and to the right. So I'm paying attention to the lighting conditions in here as I start to set up my particular view. So let me go ahead and jump over into SketchUp, and I'm just going to adjust the shadows so that the shadows are falling in that general direction. Right? And then I have to start to adjust where this is. Now, chances are the photo that was taken, and in this case, I would concur with this, the photo is taken at roughly eye level because the photographer probably is not shooting too low to the ground. They're probably just holding the camera. So SketchUp has a really good tool for establishing this, and it's over here next to the, kind of in the same little grouping as the section plane tool, and it's a little person that's kind of standing with a red X. You guys see that? Okay, if I choose that as a tool and I come over here, let's go right about there, it will position the camera roughly at eye level, right, looking at my particular building. Now I can swing using the little eye tool. I can swing around until I'm seeing the view that I'm happy with in this particular instance. Okay? So I adjusted the shadow first to make my life a little bit easier, and now I'm using this look around tool, right, this eye, to position where I think this belongs in my particular scene. Maybe I need to zoom in a little bit, right, something like that. And I'm going to kind of go back and forth between my Photoshop image and that SketchUp file to see if I can position my building the way I want it to be positioned. All right, so that seems pretty reasonable from a positioning standpoint. And if I end up not liking it, of course, I'll come back to it. So I'm going to go ahead and save this scene. So I'll go to Scenes, I'll click a plus, and I'm going to call this Perspective 2. All right, and then I'll go ahead and I'm going to turn off the shadows. I'm going to turn off the guides. Maybe. And I'm going to turn off the axes. So we're looking at just the building. And I'm going to go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And this is, of course, going to be my lines export. So let's get into today's folder here. Lines. My options are still set the same. Again, confirm that they are the same. And I'll go ahead and export. And before I do all the exports, before I do everything, I will end up going through the same set of exports. I want to go ahead and drop this into the scene and see how it fits in my particular image, because it's easier to make the adjustment now before I've done all the exports. So I'm going to go to File and then Place. And I'll drop this into the scene. I'm going to go ahead and temporarily turn this to multiply so that we can kind of see through at my particular building here. And then I need to sink this oops. Go to the Move tool. I'm going to sink this building down so that it feels like it fits. And depending on where I position it, how deep, you can tell that it gets smaller or larger. So there's going to come a point where we have the approximate right size. If you're struggling with where the positioning should be, you may consider, let's go back to SketchUp here, you may consider doing a view with, let me go to Default Styles, pick a view like this that has a horizon line in it. This isn't going to be particularly helpful down the road, but it may help you get started. So if I go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, let me call this, I don't know, Color. And I'll click Export. Go to File and then Place. And put this one in place here. Multiply. You can see that there's that dividing line. That line there needs to be roughly on the horizon. So about like that. And you can see that I was able to, by eye, place it in. But if you don't have a lot of practice doing that, you may find that it's useful to use the one with the little backdrop color so you can see where it fits in the horizon line. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So it's up to you as to whether that's particularly useful or not. Okay, I've gone ahead and I'll go ahead and say OK for right now. And now that I feel like this fits in my scene OK, I'm going to go ahead and continue the place process. So I'll go back to SketchUp. We're going to go to Hidden Line Mode. I'm going to go to my Edit. I'm going to turn off my edges. I obviously have to turn off my axes and my guides. And I am going to turn on shadows. So there's my shadows. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. This is going to be called Shadows. Export. Turn back on my edges. Turn off my shadows. Turn on X-ray mode. And I'll go File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'm going through this rather quick because obviously we've done this for the last 5 days in a row. So I'm pretty sure that you know what you're doing at this point. Export that. Turn off X-ray. I'm going to go back into my sketchy edges. I'm going to pick the airbrush with endpoints. And I need to turn off my section cuts, my section planes, and my guides. And we'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. All right. And then the last one is the pen gray. And once again, section planes, section cuts, guides, all off. File, Export, 2D Graphic. And we'll say pen gray, and then Export. OK, so now when I go into Photoshop, in this particular instance, I've moved my buildings I've placed my buildings into the background scene. So I have to be careful when I line up my images. So when I go to File, Place, and I bring in the next one, let's say it's the shadows here. Okay, I'll go ahead and say OK. I'm going to change my blending mode to multiply again. And when I move over my building, there's going to come a point where it kind of jumps. And hopefully you can see that happen live here. But it's going to try to line them up for me, which is a good feature that's built into Photoshop. So it's not too hard to do this. So let me go ahead and go to File and then Place, and we'll bring in the others. Bring in the airbrush. Change that to multiply as well. There. And we'll go to File, Place. Already have the lines. Pen gray, the shadows, the X-ray. And pen gray is the last one. That. Go ahead and say OK. And so I've gotten all those in. And I'm going to go ahead and rename them so that they're nice and clean. So we'll say this is lines. This one is the color one, which I'm really not going to end up using. I could delete it, but I'll just turn it off for now. It's going to be my shadows. My airbrush. My X-ray. This is going to be my pen gray. OK, so right now the background is a locked layer. So I'm going to right-click and say Layer from Background, so that we have a nice unlocked layer. And then I need to cut it out for where the lines are. So we'll turn everything off except for this basic image. And I'm going to select the outside, and I'm going to add to this selection that piece. So this is exactly what we've been doing. Anything that goes all the way through the building should also be selected. So I have a little bit right there that goes all the way through. Okay, so I have all of those selected. I'm going to turn on Layer 0, and I'm going to click on Add Layer Mask, which is right here. Oops, sorry. I have to be on Layer 0, Add Layer Mask. So now we can see that I have my building that's cut out, including that one little sliver that goes through, and it's sitting nicely in my particular scene. But it still feels, especially if we look at the bottom of the building here, it feels as though it's sitting on top of the image rather than being rooted or grounded into the image. So obviously the next thing that I'm going to be doing is a grass brush. Okay? The challenge here is that because I used the layer mask on the background to cut this out, I can't do the grass brush because it will just mask itself off. So I actually have to apply the mask to the layer. So if I right-click on the mask, I can say Apply Layer Mask, and then it will permanently cut out that shape. So I've lost the layer mask, but it's now permanently part of that. If I were to turn off the lines here, you can see what happens. Okay? So there it is with the layer mask. Right? And if I were to change the layer mask, if I were to say paint in white, right, it would come back. It's the layer mask. Okay? When I apply the layer mask, so I right-click on it and say Apply Layer Mask, it's no longer there. So if I went and tried to paint in white or something, it would not come back. Okay? So it's a permanently cut out. It's effectively the same thing as deleting this particular piece. Okay? But the advantage is now I can turn on, or excuse me, I can come over here to my clone stamp tool. I can use my grass brush, which is still selected. I can hold down Alt to copy from, and I can copy grass in front of my building. Okay? Now, the scale of the grass is rather important. That might be a little bit long. It depends on the look that I'm going for. The other thing is the edges that are closest to us need to have the biggest grass, and the edges that are furthest away from us need to have smaller grass. Okay? Because this is in perspective. So, for example, here along this side, right, I might start with grass like this, covering that up. But then I might shrink down as I go forward. Right, and we'll come across here. when I get here, I might go down even further, and I might go even further. Oops, too high. To cover that up. So the point is, the further away, the smaller the brush. As we get closer, make that brush bigger, and we work our way along the front edge here. One of the keys to making this feel integrated, though, is to completely conceal that bottom edge so we don't see it at all. So you can tell now that this is starting to feel like it's part of the scene because of that grass in front, rather than sitting on top of the scene. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move layer 0, or actually I should rename this to be background, all the way up to the top of the layer stack, so that when I turn on my other multiply layers, they won't darken up that bottom. Right? I still always want the grass to be applied on top of it. Okay? Now, the shadows, however, may need to go on top of the background because I need the shadows to apply here as well. Okay, but the shadows look very, very sharp. Okay? On the building, we're fine. But if I look down here on the ground, the shadows are really sharp. I need those to blend into the grass instead of have a sharp edge. Because if we were out in a grassy field, right, we wouldn't see it that way. So I'm going to work on the shadows layer for a little bit. So let me turn everything off except the shadows layer. It's not going to let me do any grass brush on it because it's a placed image or a referenced file. I need to embed that smart link. So I'm going to right click and say, why isn't it available to me here? Rasterize layer. Okay? It converts it from the smart object into a layer that I can work with. And now I can hold down Alt, copy the white along this front edge of the grass. Something like that. So we'll move over here. Now remember, same thing applies when I go back in perspective. I have to start with a large grass, but then I have to start shrinking that brush as I go backwards. So we'll shrink it back a little bit. Something like that. It might have been a little too small. Oops, definitely. All right, so let's come over here to this side. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Too big. And in an ideal world, I'm going to get rid of almost the entirety of this. All right, I want a few more there. Continue, right in there. We want that lower edge to be gone. And I can quickly show you what this is going to look like by turning on the background. You see how that shadow feels like it's part of the grass now, as opposed to being part of just a sharp edge. Okay? So let's continue along here and work on this edge. And I find it easiest to do it when the background image is off. So we'll continue along. That. Okay, so now we have the front edge. Now we have a problem, though, because the back edge, the opposite happens. So instead of having the white, we need to copy, and I'll hold down Alt, from the gray here, and we need the gray to be standing up along the back edge. Now we run the risk of copying the white into the center, which is always kind of that fine line. Sometimes it's easiest if we create a separate fill region that's temporary that matches this color that I can use in my clone stamp. I'm going to get rid of that in a little bit. I'll clone stamp, and I'm going to copy from this gray region. And then I can work my way along here to fuzz up that back edge. It's a particularly good strategy if you're just running out of space. If you have a really thin shadow, right, having this as a backdrop is always a good idea. Once again, I'm going to copy from here, and I'm going to move my way over to this, and we're going to go up this side along the back edge, something like that. Okay, so there's that. The other thing that's ultimately going to be a little problematic is we've got the shadow here along the ground, and unfortunately SketchUp changed the shadow on the building versus the shadow of the ground. It would be a lot easier if it was one continuous color. So we have two options. One, we can change the color of the shadow of the building, or we can use this same strategy and just fuzz the edge of this as well a little bit. I went off the edge of my gray, so we'll come back here and we'll cover that up. All right, and I can turn on the background, and we can start to see how that applies to the shadow. It doesn't feel like it's cut out anymore. It feels like it belongs as part of the scene. Okay, so I need to spend a little bit more time against this edge. See that halo that's happening right in there against the grass? That's what I'm trying to have go away. Like I said, the other option for making that go away would be, instead of picking this color, it would be to take the magic wand and select all of, well, it's not distinguishing enough between the two. So we'll stick with the grass brush strategy. Hold down Alt so I can copy from here. Obviously I reached the end. Quite so far. And so this does take a little bit of resetting where that happens. There we go. So I just keep coming back here, pressing Alt, and then moving back to where I need to be. Oops, off the edge. That's a problem. Copy that again. There we go. Okay. I probably need to do a little bit more along this edge still, so let me go to Alt and copy from here, and let's see if we can blur that edge just a little bit. Yeah, that's not bad. Okay, so now that I have that, remember I told you I had to make this square go away. Otherwise, when we turn it on, we're going to get a dark shadow that's floating up here in space. So I'm going to just select this so that I can't go over it. I'm going to use the eyedropper to select the background color, which is effectively white, and then we'll paint over that. And now when we turn on the background, the grass feels like it has the shadow applied to it. Okay? So it takes a little bit of time to do this, but it makes a big difference for integrating your particular work into the scene. Looks like this edge is still a little bit strong. So let me work on that edge just a little bit more. All right, that's starting to be pretty good. So let me press Control-0 so we can see the whole thing. And now just the shadows make this start to feel like it's part of the ground. And these two are integral to each other. Now remember, of course, the sun matches up with the direction the shadows are pointing. So all of this is feeding onto itself. Right? If the sun was over here and the shadows were in the wrong direction, it wouldn't feel right. So we want to take our time and make sure that that feels right. If I were to turn on the rest of these, we can start to see what this looks like in its context, in its scene. Okay? So now let's say that I wanted to apply, I'm going to turn everything off for a second. Let's say I wanted to apply a texture to the side of this particular building. Okay? So let's say it's concrete or something. Let me go back to my Creative Commons search here. And let's say we want to do concrete tiling texture. All right. And let's say that I'm going to use this one because of the bricks, it'll be obvious what I'm trying to do. Okay, it probably wouldn't be the one that I'd pick, but I think it's a good one to illustrate my strategy here. So let me download the original size. Oops. And let me put it on my flash drive here. And then I'm going to go back into Photoshop, and I'm going to go to File and then Place. I'm going to place this in here. And we need to shrink it down, obviously. So I'll hold down Shift as I'm doing this. And I'm going to place this image on this wall going back in space. Okay? So I need to think about how large the brick should be on this particular wall. And I'm thinking about them on the front edge here. So something like that is probably about right. So I'll go ahead and place that in. I'm going to copy it, Control-C, and then Control-V to get myself a second version of it. I'm going to make sure that those match up. Looks like I need a little bit more here. And I'm going to give myself some extra to play with. So drop this in, and I'm going to drop a third set right here. Okay, so now I have all of those put together, and I need them all to show up on the same layer. Whoops, that was supposed to be Shift. So I'm going to hold down Shift and select them all, right-click, and say Merge Layers. They're all on one layer now. Okay, and let's turn this temporarily into Multiply so we can kind of see through. Now, why did I create all of this extra? Because I want to adjust. If I were just to do, let me show you this again as an example. Turn this off. If I took this piece and this piece, and I created a layer mask on this layer, okay, it would look fine. It would have the material applied to it, but the material isn't in perspective, right? It doesn't look right. It's flat. So I want to change that so that it's not flat. So I'm going to use, under Edit, I'm going to go into my free transform, or excuse me, my transform, and I'm going to go to Skew, and I'm going to shrink down this edge and shrink down that edge. I'll also pull these over. I might have to pull them this way first. Pull these this way. So that this is starting to, and you can see the perspective starting to appear in front of us. Okay? I want this angle to match up with that angle. Likewise, this angle here needs to match up with this angle. Though in this particular case, because this is so much longer, it may be that I need this edge here to match up with that edge. So it's a little bit hard to judge. Let me zoom in so you can see this a little bit better. Right? So maybe I want this edge here to match up. So we'll drop that down. And we'll drop this down a little bit there as well. Okay? So now the texture that's right here is in perspective matching up with my drawing. So now that I have that, I can go ahead and let me apply. Let me go ahead and magic wand to select this and this as my two regions. And then I can go ahead on the texture here. I can click on the Add Layer Mask. And now I have a texture that's being applied in perspective. Now you can already start to see that this is a fair amount of work to go through and do on a building, which is part of why we like V-Ray and Rhino and that sort of thing, because it will do this part of the work for us. But without those tools, we can still create stuff like this relatively easily. Okay? So in this context, I'm not going to make you watch me do it again, but this would apply to all of these. The key here is that on every surface that you apply this to, you would always have to make sure that you do a separate perspective, right? Because this is vanishing to a point off here in space. This is vanishing to that same point, but the perspective is much longer. Does that make sense? So if I were trying to make that same texture line up over here, it would be a different angle than what it is on this particular piece, right? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and I won't end up using it as part of my final drawing. But I am going to do the windows. And so I'm going to do the same strategy that we used before with the windows. The difference is that I'd like to have a version of my site that would be the opposite of what I was looking at. Okay? Now, if you went to the site to do an actual site visit, it's pretty easy. You take a picture one direction, take a picture the opposite direction, you can use that as the reflection image. Does that make sense? But in our case, we'd have to search back again for something like this. I'm going to go ahead and use the same image because it's similar, but I'm going to flip it around so that it's not quite so obvious. Okay? So let me go back into Photoshop here, and I'm going to go to File and then Place, and I'm going to place this same image in again, which is my background image. I'm also going to go to Edit and then Transform, and I'm going to flip horizontal so that it's the opposite direction. Okay? Then I'm going to change this opacity down, right? Something like about like that. And I'll probably move things around a little bit too. Right? So one, this needs to come back up so that it's like that, so that the horizon is about the same. And that's not too bad. Okay? So let me go ahead with this. I'll place it. Let's go to my lines. Turn this off. And I'm going to select everywhere that there's glass. So I'll use Magic Wand, and we'll select all of these glass regions. Okay, so we have all of the glass selected. I'm going to move to my placed image right here, and I'm going to click on the Add Layer Mask. Okay, we can turn it on. So what I'm getting, right, is a reflection of ground and sky, right, similar to what's happening in the background, because that's what I'd be seeing in a reflection. I wouldn't be seeing all glass or all sky, because of the angle that I'm looking at. I'd be seeing a reflection. Now in this case, it's probably a little bit too much or too strong of a reflection, so we might still need to adjust this opacity down a little bit, maybe something like that, so it's not overpowering. But we get a sense for where that horizon is. If you were unhappy with where that horizon is, you can change it. I could use the Move tool, right, and I could drop that down. Let me unlink the mask for a second here. And then let me re-enable it. Oh, it moved them both. Anyway, we'll skip that for right now. There. So the point is that we have that reflection of the grass and the sky and or the mountains as part of this particular scene. Okay? So I have those pieces in. I'm going to rely with just the grass. Recognize, of course, I could put the actual textures on my building should I want to. Okay? And now it's a matter of starting to add a little bit more to this particular scene. And so once again, one of the best ways of making this look like a building is to put some people in the scene. So I'm going to go to my set of cutout images. Let's go to Digital Tools. And I'm going to go into Resources, Collage Images. And then I need to find some people to put in the particular scene. Yeah, Not good enough. All right, we can use her. I don't know why you'd be walking with no shoes in a meadow, but maybe. Okay, so I'm going to take her, and I don't know which version I'm going to want, so I'll download all three. Then right-click and say Save Image As, and we'll put that on my flash drive into today's folder. The silhouette, I probably won't use in the scene, but it'll work nicely as a shadow. So let me save image as, save. And we'll do this one, save image as, and we'll save it as well. Okay, so now I need to put her into the scene. So I'm going to go to File and then Place. And I'm going to drop the color version into the scene. And then I have to adjust the size of the person. Now, one of the tricks, if you remember back to this part when we were doing it, is to make sure that her eyes end up at the horizon. So her eyes are now at the horizon. If I want her to go deeper into the scene, I can move her deeper into the scene. If I want her closer to me, I can pull her out, right? But her eyes should always stay at that horizon point. So maybe she needs to be over here so that it's like she's walking to the scene. Remember, sometimes the best strategy is to make the person that you're trying to put into the scene cover up something that you don't want seen, right? So maybe I didn't like that edge of the stairs. It wasn't modeled correctly, so I put the person in front of it. So be intelligent about where you're picking. Okay, so she's now in the scene. That's good. Now, I happen to like her as well because the shadow's falling on the correct side of her, and the highlight side is on that side, which is good. So I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm going to put her shadow right there. So let me go to File and then Place. And we have to shrink her shadow down. To be roughly the same as her. Okay, not too bad. Then I'll go to Edit and then Transform. And we're going to go to Skew. And I need for her head to be coming toward us. Oops. I have to work my way around slower here. Nope, didn't want it. Try that one more time. Transform, Skew. Nope. Let me do it this way. I'm going to start by flipping it first. So I'm going to go to Transform, Flip Verticals, so that I can start with her down here, and then I'll do my Skew. Let me go to Skew now. And we need that to be going this direction. We need it to be a little bit shorter. All right. Now, it may also be helpful to see your shadows layer. No, it's not going to let me turn it on until I commit to it. So I know that the shadow should be roughly looking in that direction. Okay? And the shadows are probably long enough to where I'm not going to see all of her shadow as part of the scene. I can try, but her shadow might not quite fit. Let's go something like that. Shrink it a little bit more, move it over. And again, I'm making her feet kind of match up. Okay? So now I have that in place. Let's switch her layer into Multiply so we're seeing the shadow. Right? And I'll go ahead and commit to it. So there's the shadow. We already did the building shadow, which is right here. I want to do the same thing that I did with the building shadow to this shadow. So let's turn everything off, except for the woman and her shadow. All right. And I'm going to work on the shadow, and again with the clone stamp tool. And this is another example where having some fill color over here to work from is not a bad idea. So let me sample that color gray. And I'm just going to fill it in there. And then we'll go ahead and clone stamp. And again, with the grass brush, I'm going to hold down Alt and copy along this edge, I hope. Nothing selected first, sorry. Hold down Alt, and we're going to copy along this edge. Oh, come on. Hold on a second. When it did its, yeah, it gave me a transparent background. Let me step back here. Okay, so when I originally placed this image in, it was a PNG with a transparent background, not a JPEG. So I need to fill in the background. So let me select everything. And I'm going to need to select these little regions in here as well. That. Right. It actually might be easier instead to select the person, like that, and then do a select inverse. And I want to paint everything in white. So let me zoom out here. And I need to rasterize this layer, and then we can paint it all in white. All right, so now that's done. Now we can do what I was doing before. Okay, so let's use that grass brush again. Clone stamp. Hold down Alt. We're going to go right along that edge. Try to soften that up a little bit. Like that. All right. Now, when we're on the back edge, I have to copy from the gray, and this is where having the other region of gray can be very, very helpful. Paint that in. Clone stamp. Hold down Alt. We're going to copy. Oops. Deselect. Clone stamp along this back edge there. Like that. I need to do a little bit of touch-up in the front. So once again, I'll hold down Alt to copy from there. I need to cover that part up a little bit more. Something like that. This edge in here is a little bit awkward, so I'm just going to go a little bit generous with my clone stamp like that. And then I am also going to use just a regular brush to fill in that one little piece that I accidentally covered up. So now that that's done, if I were to turn on my background, we can start to see that the shadow feels like it's part of that particular scene. Obviously, I have to get rid of this piece before I can go completely forward. So let's flip the colors and let's get rid of this. There we go. Press Control minus. And now, if I turn on the background, turn on her, and I'll turn on the background, it's not too bad, except that I need a little bit of grass in front of her. Right? So I'm going to take a quick little bit of grass, something like that, from the background layer, right here. I'm just going to Control-C to copy, and then Edit Paste to paste the version. It's going to be on its own layer right there. And then I can work with that little bit. Okay, that needs to be below that. Yeah, like that. And then I can do a little bit of manipulation on that particular piece. So if we look at it, let me turn this off. There it is. I just gave myself a little bit of grass to work with. And let's select for her feet. Select this. I'm going to select inverse, and then I'll delete. Oops. I'll delete that so her feet are there, and then I can use a little grass brush on this. Hold down Alt, and we'll cover up right there at the bottom of her feet, just a little bit, so she feels like she's part of this grass. Okay? So now that that's done, we can go ahead and turn back on my background. And because it was a direct copy, it was an easy clone stamp. It blends right into where we were. So let me zoom back out, and we can see that now she's part of the scene. Her shadow's part of the scene, right, as is the building. We need a little bit more to make the building stand out, so I'll turn on the rest of my pieces here. Let me turn off the airbrush. No, let's leave the airbrush on. I don't really like the X-ray. I don't think it's adding too much, so I'm going to leave that one off. And let's see here. I'm going to turn off that fill. And now we essentially have a person in the scene. We've got the scene itself. The building feels very integrated. But maybe we're going to take it a step further. And then this is, I promise, the last thing that I'll show you. And that is to use something called a bird brush tool, which is just kind of fun. And I can't resist doing it. So if we do a Google search for Photoshop bird brush, right, we can look around for a Photoshop bird brush. And we can go ahead and download it. I'm picking this one. There it is. It's downloading as a zip file. Inside there's a .abr, which is a Photoshop brush file. Let me go ahead and copy it, and I'm going to put it into today's folder. Go ahead and paste that. There it is. Then I'm going to go into Photoshop, and I'm going to go into my presets. And it's under, why can't I find it? Edit, Presets, Preset Manager. Under Brushes, I'm going to click on Load, and I'm going to go find that file that I just downloaded. So that was on my flash drive. There it is. We'll go ahead and load it, and there's all of my bird brushes. Okay, so we'll go ahead and say Done. I'm going to click on the regular brush tool. I'm going to choose a black, and then I'm going to pick from my brushes one of the bird brushes. Okay, maybe it's something like this. And what the bird brushes do is they allow us, when we paint, like if I were to do this, they allow us to paint in birds. Okay, that might be too many birds, so I might put in one bird. Then I might change to a different bird. Oops. And let's drop that one bird down, something like that. So these are very subtle, but they can add a lot to your particular image if you put just a few in. Right? So here's a couple that are flying. Right, something like that. So it's just a little bit of extra depth, right? But I wanted to show you that these exist because they're kind of a fun way of adding a little bit of extra texture to your bird or to your overall image. Okay, so there is always some combination that feels right of things. Like in this particular example, the background texture for the walls seemed like too much. Just having this seemed to work nicely as part of it. One of the things about doing these Photoshop collages is you're never trying to make it look as if you were taking a Photoshop or a photo of this particular scene. So by deliberately saying, this is a drawing, this is what I'm adding to this particular scene, it's easy to see the difference between what's designed, what you're proposing, and what exists. If it's all trying to be super photorealistic, we don't necessarily know what's being added, what's not being added. So something like this is very much appropriate for a kind of a design presentation. And you can do a lot with the right number of birds and the sun and the people to kind of create a mood that you want portrayed in your particular image. Okay? So I'll turn you loose. Remember, you need to turn in on Wednesday an elevation, a plan, a section, or a perspective. Pick 3 of those 4. So this obviously could be one of them. It's just a matter of you choose. right? And then get in your head that we're going to be working on portfolio. Bring all your stuff. We'll talk at length about portfolios individually. You can show me what you have. We'll try to make them better, etc., etc.